Good morning. Our scripture this morning is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, 1 through 8. As he came out of the temple, one of the disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus said to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead you astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place. But the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pains." Holy wisdom, holy words. I invite you now to join me in prayer. Gracious God, Creator God, we give thanks that we have spiritual truths to ponder over. We give thanks to know that you are in all things. Help us to hear your words and truths. Help us to understand that which you want us to understand. Let us give thanks that we do not walk through this world alone, but with you and also with others. Let us meditate on your words, and then let our actions reflect the truth that is in them. With thanks and praise. Amen.
The very first commentary that I opened up in preparation for doing the sermon had big letters that said, "Ministers avoid this passage." And I was like, what's up with that? And then I started getting into it. And I found that this particular passage is most often referred to as the little apocalypse, which has a very doomsday kind of thing going on with it. I'm like, well, okay, Jesus really wasn't much of a doomsday kind of guy. He was more into an uplifting, let's love each other and do right by each other kind of guy. So why would he be one to talk about hard times? And when I got into it, I started thinking, well, who among us hasn't at one time or another been caught up by some salesperson or politician into jumping on the bandwagon and saying, yeah, let's go there, let's be there, only to find out that we misplaced our trust and that the package didn't live up to our expectations. And we walk away feeling embarrassed, humiliated, asking ourselves, how could I be so gullible as to fall for a trick like this? And that's kind of where Jesus starts out this passage. And in order to really understand it, we got to look at what Mark was trying to say. Now, the Gospel of Mark was written as a performance piece. It was intended to be read from beginning to end in one sitting. So we can't really get the whole scope and understanding of this particular passage without stepping back a little bit and seeing what was going on before we come to Mark chapter 13. And prior to Jesus interacting with his disciples, walking out of the temple, we find him in the temple doing some teaching. Well, that's not unusual. That's not uncommon. But what we miss is an understanding and realization that Jesus knows that this is his last week on earth. And he's trying to make some points, get into some last-minute words for people. And so he does that teaching in the temple. He's walking out. And now he has an opportunity to make a revelation to his disciples. And it starts with one of them looking back saying, "Isn't this an awesome building?" And Jesus just flippantly said, "Yeah, it's history." And we stop and think about it. The Acropolis, the pyramids, the temples, the Aztec temples in Mexico, they're all still standing. But the temple of the holy God is gone, wiped from the face of the earth. That's pretty amazing stuff when you think about it. So in this revelation, it shocks the disciples. And they're left speechless. So they're walking along, they go to the Mount of Olives, they sit down, they finally perk up the courage and say, "Well, you know, could you get into that a little bit more?" And it's like Jesus set it up. He wanted them to ask him to give him explanation. And the reason for this is pretty obvious. Jesus knows human nature. He wasn't thinking about, "Hey, this would be a great time for me to go to my favorite restaurant. Or maybe I could take a trip to that site that I've always wanted to see." He wasn't even thinking about filling his bucket list. Which, you know, in reality, he might have actually thought about. No, in this last week of his life on this earth, he was worried about his disciples and followers. He knew how easy it is for human beings to lose faith, to get lost, to become fearful, and to get caught up in the enthusiasm and zeal of somebody who comes along looking to be the center of attention, instead of focusing people on trusting in God. And so here he had his door open, sitting on the Mount of Olives, surrounded by his disciples, the people he loved most. And he says to them, "Be careful, you don't get led astray." I'm sure they were very confused. But then we have Mary. Mary was a middle-aged woman who had been a churchgoer all her life. She'd done everything that had been expected of her, everything that she wanted to do for the church and the community. She was on the committees. She cooked meals every time some event came up. She supported the youth program the best that she could. She raised 3 kids, had a pretty good life going. Well, the kids grew up. And in order to get their jobs and fulfill their careers, they had to leave home. They had to leave the community. They were gone. So it was just her and her husband, and they were like, "All right." A year later, massive heart attack. He's gone. She's on her own. Goes through the grieving process, tries to carry on her life the best she can in a way that not only she had been doing it, but the way that people expected her to do it. But Mary felt lost and alone. She didn't really have anybody who got her. And she was somewhat dismayed. One day she saw this advertisement about a workshop going on at a bookstore not far from where she lived, a coffee shop thing. She knew that these things were going on in the camp community where she lived. She'd never really gotten involved in them. But it looked interesting, different. It was something to do. So she decided to go check it out. And the guy who was doing the workshop, he sounded really neat. He had a lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm. He made sense. So she kept going back. And over a period of time, she got really caught up into it. And then one day, her friends were coming over to visit because they were getting worried about her. She had stopped going to church because she'd been going to these other events. They came over and checked on her. And she says, "I have finally found a true prophet of God. stopped giving, stopped supporting, turned all of her attention over to this new thing. And that's what she was doing. And she felt pretty good about it. Went on for quite a while, absolutely trusting everything that this person said. One morning, she says she's feeling very joyful and perky that morning. She trucks on down to the local coffee shop to get herself a latte. And she's sitting there, and lo and behold, in comes her goober. And she watches. And he walks over to this table on the other side of the room, where a woman is sitting in a chair enjoying a cup of coffee at a table. He walks right up to her and says, in a very loud and commanding voice, "You're in my seat." And the woman, startled, looks up and, "Well, there wasn't anybody here when I got here. There's plenty of other tables." "No, this is my seat and you need to move now." And she's like, well, now very defensive. She's like, "Forget it. There's plenty of tables. Grab one." As soon as she said that, he reached down and grabbed her glass of ice water and threw it in her face. Mary was aghast. Embarrassed, humiliated, she snuck out of that room as quickly as she could. How could she have been so gullible to buy into somebody who would treat others so bad? Next day, she found out he got arrested for that because he started cussing her out, and the management had to call the police and they were locked up. This is what Jesus was worried about. He was worried about his followers over time forgetting about the wonders that they had seen, minimizing the teachings and the message of God's love, God's purpose for creation. And he wanted to help give them a revelation of things to come, things to expect, in the hopes of giving them the courage through this guidance to stay true to the faith. To remember, yeah, bad things are going to happen in the world. It's okay. It's all part of the growing process. He talked to them about wars, famines, pestilence, all these things getting ready to come down the pipe. Well, to us, as we look back, we're like, well, so what? You know, we go to CNN, we get everyday newsreels of every war, every disaster, every earthquake that's happening on planet Earth. But back then in first century Palestine, they didn't have melodramatic journalists in your face with a camera and microphone going, "Hey, did you hear about the earthquake down in Samaria today?" or up there, or wherever. Or what about over in India? They had that big fire. Did you know about that? You know, they knew only what was in their face. Because they didn't have anything going on to tell them, oh yeah, there's earthquakes, so we know there's going to be more. Yeah, there's famine, so we know there's going to be more. When Jesus laid these concerns on them, these prophecies, if you will, on them, they must have startled them. But we know in hindsight, yeah, all this did come to pass. Yes, there were famines. The Jews revolted. A war. The temple was destroyed, wiped from the face of the earth. Jesus knew it was coming. And he gave them a heads up because he knew in their lifetimes these things were going to happen, at least for some of them anyway. And he wanted to get them prepared. And he wanted to get us prepared. Because we too, in the face of dealing with famines, troubles of our daily lives, economic difficulties, which are a big deal to us today, we too can get caught up in the zeal and the pain and the suffering, in the doubt and insecurity, and walk away losing our faith and trust in God. So Jesus wasn't just speaking to them, he was speaking to us about this is what you have to be prepared for. And one other aspect that we need to look at is today we are bombarded by any number of people around the world who call themselves messiahs, the Messiah, or promote themselves as being the reincarnation of Jesus. You go on the internet and there's a list. Did you know that? Yeah. Top 10 messiahs of the 21st century. Right there to look up. Name by name. Here's their names and addresses. Yep, gives a pretty good description. They even found one who had taken off from his temple and they found him in a ditch. I don't know why they were looking for him, but they did. So we have to be careful too to remember Jonestown, Texas, Montana, right here in our own backyard. It's easy for us to get distracted and caught up in the zeal of somebody who's more concerned about to be the center of attention and through manipulating people in fear instead of inspiring them to love. We have to remember Jesus' revelation in our lives to remind us to be strong, keep the faith, stay true to the trust. So thus it could be said that Jesus wanted us to see to the welfare and the well-being of his disciples and of others. Now, this passage was just the beginning of his message to the disciples and to us about what we can expect, probably have to endure, being committed to him, trusting in him and believing. And also as a warning, through revealing to us just how bad can get if we are committed